This week we're talking about symbols. Now, this word has many different meanings according to the context. It might mean the relationship of the swastika to the Nazi Party in World War II. It might mean the cross on top of the Roman Catholic Church. Or it might mean the flag. Is this simply a piece of cloth, or does it in fact stand for a culture? Well, I had a very good friend many years ago who worked for the marketing department of BMW, and he used to visit many of their major dealers around England. It was interesting, he was not allowed to wear the color blue. Now, it seems quite a strange thing to start telling your employees. The critical thing was that inside the BMW dealership, BMW had dictated the only blue thing would be the badge. If you think about a BMW badge, it has little blue elements within a large circle. And there was one of these very big badges on the wall in every dealership. And they did not want anything to dilute the blue in that badge. So he wasn't allowed to wear blue. They clearly took that symbol very, very seriously. So symbols have the capacity to be extremely powerful elements in our communication process. And that's one of the focuses of the readings this week. One of the other focuses that I want to just touch on very briefly, and it's intimately related to the symbols, is the issue of culture. Now, culture is another word that can have many different meanings. We can be talking about corporate culture. In a commercial organization, we could be talking about whether the corporate culture is collectivist. In other words, we encourage the good of the group, or whether it's individualist, where individuals are expected to be working essentially for their own benefit. And the act of climbing the corporate ladder, no matter quite what the consequences, are strongly encouraged in that kind of environment. Or we could be talking at even a national level. So we can be looking at the culture of, say, the US, which is generally considered to be the most individualistic country in the world. In other words, individuals are expected to be working and striving, and their goals are expected to be related to the good of them and their immediate family. On the other hand, particularly in the Far East, and to some extent, in fact, Portugal, the culture is much more collectivist, where the good of the group tends to be taken into account to a greater extent than simply the good of the individual. And as you might expect, there are symptoms of the culture that are very different in both those environments. So the symbols and meaning paper I thought would be particularly interesting to you. We are all communicating in a multicultural or a cross-cultural environment to some extent, whether we're working for a peacekeeping force or the Red Cross or a commercial organization. We're all dealing with multicultures. Whether it's in our employees or the people we're selling to or our customers, the people we're talking to. Many different cultures impinge on our lives. It's very important then to realize that some of the communication processes that we use and that surround us and that we receive are strongly related to culture. If you're talking to somebody in the US for any length of time, whether it's a university lecture or whether it's a public speaker of some description, it's probably not going to be very long before there is a sports analogy thrown at you. You'll be told to step up to the plate, or well, that came out of left field, or whatever. Because the culture of the US is very supportive of sports, and sports are a major source of recreational expenditure, both time and cash. in the US. So the sports analogy is a popular means of communication, and of course a very off-putting one if you don't understand what it is the person's talking to you. There are many other ways in which cultures can impact communication processes. I was working in North Africa at one time, and it took me a few weeks to realize that in this particular culture, which was a part of Egypt, it was not acceptable to say that you don't know. So you might be asking somebody a perfectly innocent question, like sort of, you know, you're in a foreign town and you're asking where the bank is, and you will get instructions that are totally erroneous. You'll be walking around this area, well, I'm sure that's exactly what he said, and the fact of the matter is that it just would not have been acceptable for that person to say, I don't know, which makes it a little bit difficult when you're trying to find the bank, but it's quite an important thing to appreciate. If you're talking to people from the Japanese culture, there are various different processes of communication that we would consider to be very straightforward and efficient, which could be really quite insulting to people in that culture. So one has to be very, very aware of these in our communication processes. So anyway, I hope you find this interesting. There are no illustrations, very few illustrations this week on the PowerPoint, because it's very straightforward stuff, and I think it's very interesting. It stands alone, and I want you to see that there are very strong connections between this issue of symbolism and the issue of communication. We have to be aware of the symbolism if we're communicating within our organizations or outside our organizations.